Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Redesigned IRS.gov page helps people closing a business. Page features steps to navigate final tax actions. IR 2020-224, September 30th, 2020, Washington. The Internal Revenue Service today launched a redesigned page on IRS.gov to help business owners navigate the federal tax steps when closing a business. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that are closing their businesses this year due to all the problems that are going on. As you go through that process, it can be a painful process, obviously, to close the business, but you want to make sure that you follow through with the closing of the business and do it well so that it doesn't kind of come back and keep nagging you as you keep going forward. So note, when you close the business, if you have like a sole proprietorship, it's usually going to be an easier type of thing to close. If you have employees, however, you want to make sure that you close out the employee information as best you can. Make sure that you file the year-end information, even if you're closing the business in the middle of the year, so that you make sure to give the W-2s and close out the payroll correctly. If you have some other type of business like an S corporation or a LLC, then those, because they're like a separate legal entity and that's what gives the added liability protection, they're harder to close because basically you have to kill the separate legal entity, right? It's got to go away. Otherwise it stays around. It's harder to kill the separate legal entity than to stop the sole proprietorship Schedule C type of business. And if you don't close that separate legal entity properly, and you're in some states that may actually charge you, even though they're flow-through entities, something like a fee or whatever they want to call it, a tax or a fee or a charge, whatever, but they charge you a yearly type of fee on it in some way, even though it's a flow-through entity. And if you don't get all the taxes paid and close it off, then they can continue to accumulate. So you want to make sure that you close everything. It's really worthwhile to take the time, if the business stopped, then to take the time to wind everything down properly, close out the year properly, pay off all the payroll, pay off the taxes, close the business entity so that it doesn't, like, they have a ghost shell business entity that's always, never died, right? It's out there haunting you and they won't close it because the state wants to collect, a fee on it each year. So you want to try to avoid that and close it up. And it can be a little bit challenging to do so. So make sure to go through the steps on it. It's worth the time to do it, in my opinion. So during this difficult and challenging time, the IRS streamlined the, quote, closing a business, end quote, page into simple steps so business owners and self-employed individuals can quickly find the information they need. Quote, the IRS realizes small businesses and self-employed individuals are facing challenges in their personal and business lives during these uncertain times, end quote, said Eric Hylton, Commissioner, Small Business / Self-Employed Division. Quote, closing a business is a difficult decision, and we want to help ease the burden for people making this tough choice. We redesigned the closing a business page on IRS.gov to help businesses comply with final tax responsibilities, end quote. The information includes what forms to file and how to report revenue received in the final year of business and expenses incurred before closure. File a final return and related forms. The type of return to file depends on whether the business is a sole proprietorship, partnership, or corporation. The page features a section for each business type. Business owners can click on the section that applies to them to get the returns and forms they need. So you need to indicate, one of the things you need to do is indicate that the business has been closed, and you typically will do that, by checking off some box, on the final tax return to indicate that. Now, note, again, that's only one of the steps you need to do, because you want to make sure that you close everything else out properly, all the responsibilities, including the tax payments that might be outstanding to close everything. Otherwise, even though you check off the box saying, I have the final return, they may not close it on either or both the federal level and the state level, because they're going to say, hey, you still have obligations outstanding, so we can't close it even though you filed the final return for it. So that's one of the steps that you got to take into consideration, but just doing that may not do the whole thing if you have other responsibilities that are outstanding, and they still need the company open to use basically the EIN number to take care of those. So back to the text. Take care of employees. Business owners with one or more employees must make final federal tax deposits and report employment taxes. So if you have employees and you stopped business in the middle of the year, then you probably want to say, okay, I'm done. I don't want anything more to do with this. But obviously employees, you don't want to get messed up on the reporting of information to the employees, because there's different things that are involved in that. That's where many businesses that have a lot of the problems that come about on litigation or something like that have to do with the employees oftentimes. And with the payroll taxes, there's an added wrinkle in the confusion with the taxes as well, because if you don't pay payroll taxes, then some of those payroll taxes actually came out of the employee wages. So it could actually be seen as not only not paying taxes, but basically stealing from the employees, because the withholdings are actually coming out of the employee check. So you really want to avoid problems with payroll. So I would make sure that you're still following through with the payroll, get all the obligations you need to complete and wrap everything up done. And then the reporting at the end of the year for the W-2 reporting and whatnot, make sure to go through that process so you avoid any problems with both taxes and human resources type of problems. And again, any kind of problems with litigation or this kind of thing. A lot of those types of problems happen, with employees in businesses. And so you want to make sure you have all the records, do everything as cleanly as possibly, follow through, close up that process. So pay taxes owed. Even if a small business closes now, tax payments may be due next filing season. So you want to make sure that you pay the taxes that are owed, because again, if you owe the taxes, the IRS will not close the business, even though you check off the box most likely to close the business. The EIN will still be out there, and the state may not close the business as well. And if the state charges you a fee each year, and you just kind of close it out, then the fee may still accumulate, because the state's going to say, hey, the entity's still alive, even though you're not using it at all. It's just a shell. It's just a ghost entity, but it never got closed properly. So we're going to keep, you could have interest and penalties that keep on accumulating in that situation. So you want to make sure that if you can pay the fees, pay the fees. It's worthwhile to pay the fees if you can, to close things up properly and not have to deal with the thing not closing and then having to kind of linger on as you go forward. So report payments to contract workers. Businesses that pay contractors at least $600 for services, including parts and materials, during the calendar year in which they go out of business must report those payments. So if you pay contractors, the idea is these are people that are not corporations. You pay them over $600, they're sole proprietorship. The IRS wants you to report their income not only to them, but to the IRS. That's what they really want. And they want the IRS wants to know that these people made money, so they can double check and make sure that they're reporting their money. So the IRS is saying, hey, we're going to still hold you responsible to not only your W-2 employees that you got to report the W-2s, but also reporting those 1099s. These are the year-end kind of obligations. If you close in the middle of the year, you're probably saying, hey, the business is closed, I don't want to deal with this anymore. But you want to follow through, especially with the employee situation. And then the 1099s, the IRS is saying, hey, you're still responsible for the 1099s. So cancel EIN and close IRS business account. The IRS cannot close out an account until the business has filed all necessary returns and paid all taxes owed. So the EIN number is the employee identification number, but it's also kind of like the social security number for the business. So if you have an EIN number, you want to close that, because that's the number that really kind of, you can say it kind of kills the entity, right? That's the thing that stops the entity from basically being an entity. But the IRS won't do that. Well, that's one of the indications, the major indications, because that's the number that indicates the entity. But the IRS won't close it unless everything is paid up in full, because they need the number to tie out to any payment. They can't close the entity. They can't kill off the number if they still need to receive payments that need the number on it. So they're going to wait till that happens. And the state will typically do that too, as well. So you want to see if you can pay off all the taxes due. You would like to do that so that you can cleanly close the thing out. So keep business records. How long a business needs to keep records depends on what's recorded in each document. So you want to keep the records at least 3 years. I would say longer than that, probably like 7. And if you want the employee information, then I would keep that basically for life, because again, the employees are where most of the problem is, and you want to have as detailed records on that just to show that you did everything as best you could with it. So the page also has information to help business owners who are declaring bankruptcy, selling their business, and terminating retirement plans. For easy access, they can be reached on the page at IRS.gov, closing a biz. There's a link to that here. There'll be a link to this in the description.